Chapter 6. "Oh, dearest Malou," Lisa erupted, taking her sister-in-law in a tight embrace as soon as she and Raphael passed the threshold of Dan and Malou's home. "How frightful for you. I couldn't believe it when Dante told us. Just unbelievable. How could it have happened? Dan is such a good skier." She turned to Raphael. "Why don't you just stand there? Go, and bring the bags to the kitchen, dear. Everybody must be starving." "Thank you," Malou said, a little overwhelmed and not liking the fact that Lisa seemed to be taking over the household even before she entered her home. "Come on in, we're in the living room." As soon as she took her coat off and hung it on a peg in the hallway, Lisa went on, "Okay then, why don't we set up the table while the men unpack lunch, shall we?" and led Malou by the arm toward the dining room. "And then you can tell me all about Dan's accident and how he's coping in the hospital." "He's not coping, Lisa," Malou cut in before her sister-in-law could go further with her know-it-all assumptions. "He's in a coma." "Oh dear God, why didn't you tell us?" She looked at Dante accusingly. "If I had known, I would have prepared meals for the children so that they could stay in the hospital with him as long as you needed." "It's quite all right, Lisa. No need to fuss. We've got all of it in hand. Heath is looking after the children." "And where are the little darlings?" Lisa asked, looking around her. "They're at the skiing rink with Heath. Don't worry, they'll be back for lunch," Malou replied, going to the sideboard and taking out the tablecloth that she had stretched over the dining room table. "All right then," Lisa said, visibly a little deflated in her purpose of controlling everyone and everything within her reach. A couple of hours later, Malou was growing impatient to return to the hospital. There was something that bothered her. She couldn't figure out what it was, but while everyone was watching some sports program on TV, she touched her amulet and saw Dan's face contorted in a painful grimace. In a bounce, she shot out from the sofa, rushed to the hallway, and grabbed her winter coat under the astonished gazes of everyone in the living room. "Where do you think you're going?" Lisa demanded, as if addressing a wayward child. Jumping out of his seat, Dante hurried into the corridor leading to the front door and grabbed Malou by the arm. "What's the matter? Can I drive you?" he asked. "Yes, I think it's best if you drive, thanks," Malou replied, opening the front door already. While Dante was slipping into his jacket, the weather was turning quite cold after the snowfall. Stefano squeezed past him and ran after his mother. "Mum, what's going on?" he asked. "It's nothing to worry about, Stefano. It's just that I promised the doctor to be back this afternoon when Dad will go for some more tests," Malou lied, taking her son into a warm hug and kissing the top of his head. "Why don't you go and watch over Gabby and Daniel for me, okay?" Stefano looked up at his mother and shot a quick glance at Dante, who was already unlocking the car doors. "Okay, Mum, but promise me you'll be back soon." "Of course I'll be back before you guys go to bed, okay? And tell Dad that I'll look after everything when he's gone, okay?" "Sure, I promise. And I'm sure he'll be glad to hear that you're taking charge in his absence," Malou answered, looking up at Raphael and Heath, who had joined Lisa on the front stoop. "I'll be back soon," she told them as she got into Dante's car. "Can we still go for a visit?" Lisa shouted, just as Raphael pulled her back inside the house. "I hope she doesn't come to the hospital today," Malou remarked, closing the passenger door. "I don't think Raphael will let her near Dan right now. He knows that it would be fruitless for them to visit him while he's in a coma," Dante said, merging into the Sunday afternoon traffic. "But what bit you all of a sudden? We were supposed to return to the hospital only tonight." "It's just that I suddenly felt very uneasy about Dan. I can't explain it, Dante. I've got a feeling that something's not right, and I have to get to him as soon as I can." "But he's in a coma. What could worry you that much?" "I can't tell you, Dante. Call me weird if you like, but I've got to stay with him for a while. That's all I know." When they reached the hospital, seeing Malou's impatience, Dante dropped her off near the main entrance and told her to go ahead while he found a parking spot. Malou was indeed on edge. She had no idea what was going on with Dan. On her way up the elevator, she looked down at her amulet. She was now afraid to touch it. She didn't want to see Dan's face again the way she had seen it in her mind's eye before she left the home. "Lord, please let him be okay," Malou prayed silently as she rushed along the corridor leading to Dan's room. She stopped to look through the glass windows of the room and didn't see anything amiss. Nothing had changed. Dan was still lying in his bed, seemingly unaware of what was going on around him, such as he did that very morning. Curious to find out what had happened, Malou turned away and went to the nurse's station. "Excuse me, Nurse Jenkins," she said to a young woman upon reading her name tag. "Could you tell me if there's been any change in my husband's condition since this morning?" The nurse looked up. "And your husband's name?" she asked. "Politano, Dan Politano," Malou replied. Looking up at the computer screen for a moment, Nurse Jenkins then said, "Nothing has been recorded thus far, Mrs. Politano. The doctor was in to check on him earlier this afternoon, but he hasn't ordered any other treatment than monitoring his vitals." "And could you tell me if anyone has been in to see him after I left this morning?" Malou asked. That I wouldn't know, Mrs. Politano. I've just come on shift myself, and as far as I can tell, no one has been in your husband's room since I've arrived. Mind you, I'm not always sitting at the desk. She turned to look at another nurse who had just stepped in near the station supply cupboard. Hold on a minute, let me ask Natalie if she's noticed anyone going in, she said to Malou, getting to her feet. Thanks, Malou said, while seeing Dante come down the hallway. Nurse Jenkins returned a moment later in company of another older woman. This is Nurse Natalie Pina, Mrs. Politano, she told Malou. Oh, hi, Nurse Pina, Malou replied, smiling. It's just that I was wondering if my husband, Mr. Politano, has had any visitors after I left this morning. Were you here? Well, to tell you the truth, Mrs. Politano, I generally don't pay much attention to the visitors, but this man was a little strange. He came down the corridor at lunchtime, and since we didn't have any tray for your husband, I just passed by his room when this man came out. Even the nurse's aide noticed him. He was a small man with a dark beard, something like a goatee, and walked with a cane. He made me think of some character out of a fairy tale, unreal-like. By this time, Dante had joined Malou near the counter and now asked, Did he stay long, do you know? Well, no, actually. Andrea, that's the nurse's aide, said that he disappeared as fast as he appeared, like out of nowhere. Nurse Pina replied. Well, thank you, Malou said to the nurses, and then looking up at Dan, she added, We'd better go in for a bit then, obviously preoccupied at what she had just learned. Who do you think this guy is? Dante asked once in the room, standing on either side of Dan's bed. I have no idea, Dante, but I don't like it. She took Dan's hands in hers. He is alone here and incapable of defending himself from anyone. What are you talking about? Dante said, keeping his voice down with some visible effort. It's just what Heath said when he saw what happened on the slope that's been bothering me. What did he say? You were there, you know? Malou shook her head. Do you remember Heath said that he saw something strange before he fell? Oh yeah, he said that it was like something had caught him between the legs and twisted him around. Is that what you mean? Yes, that's what's been bothering me. What if someone wanted to harm Dan for some reason and chose a skiing accident to kill him? Come on, Malou, now you're imagining things. What would anyone want with Dan? Besides, if something had hit him, Heath would have found it when he came down to the spot where Dan fell. What about that strange man then? What did he want with Dan? He probably got in the wrong room by mistake. That happens, you know, especially when you're getting old and you don't move too fast on your feet. Malou sat down in the chair beside Dan's bed and looked down in her lap. She was not at all convinced that there was nothing in that strange visit. Why don't I leave you be for a few minutes? I'll go and get myself a coffee from the coffee shop downstairs. Do you want me to bring you something back? Malou shook her head. No thanks, maybe later. Okay then, Dante said on his way out of the room. I'll be back in 2 ticks, and don't you start talking to strange men, he added, smiling. As soon as Malou saw him pass by the windows in the corridor, she stood up, went to lift Dan's covers to look if anyone had touched his dream catcher. She breathed a sigh of relief when she saw it was still in place and sat down again. Then, hesitant, she touched her amulet and looked up at her husband. Since she saw nothing in her mind, she asked, Dan, tell me what happened if you can, please. Her hand still on her pendant. Getting no answer, she waited and then repeated the question more slowly. Maybe this man did something to him, and he wouldn't be able to talk to me again. Malou fretted silently as she took her hand off her amulet, and then suddenly she heard Dan's voice. He's the devil, he said faintly. But sweetheart, I saw you in pain. What was that? Did he touch you? He tried, Dan replied slowly. I saw him. He tried. Okay, that's it. Tomorrow I'll get you out of here and back to the store where we first arrived. That's what the old Indian said. I've got to bring you to the same sidewalk and in front of that drugstore for us to go back. Anyway, it's too dangerous, Dan, for you to stay here, even with your dream catcher on your chest. If this guy is trying to get you while no one is here, no telling what he'll do next. He tried to touch me, Dan said, his voice quite clear now. And he couldn't, could he? No. His hand burned my leg. Not waiting for further explanation from him, Malou lifted the blanket near Dan's feet and looked at his feet and legs. There was nothing there apart from some more bruising which he had probably got when he tumbled down the cliff, she thought. But there was no burn marks of any sort. She replaced the covers and said, I still don't know how I'm supposed to get you out of here with you unable to walk. But I promise you by tomorrow we'll be back in Pahokee. Dan didn't answer. Meanwhile, when Dante reached the coffee shop, the fact that someone had obviously entered Dan's room and that the little man had disappeared, as the nurse said, he decided to call Raphael from the nearest payphone. Hi, Keith, Dante said when Dan's cousin picked up the phone. Is Raphael still there? Yeah. Do you want to talk to him? Keith asked. Is anything wrong with Dan? No, nothing like that. Just give the phone to Raphael, okay? Okay, here he is, Dante heard Keith say before Raphael's voice came on the line. What's up? Dan's brother asked. Good question, Raphael. I've no idea what's going on, but some guy showed up at the hospital around lunchtime, and from what the nurses said, I surely couldn't place him. I was wondering if by chance you knew an old guy with a goatee, someone we deal with in the shop or the suppliers. Does that ring any bells? Let me see, Raphael said, and then paused for a moment. You know, there was a little guy that came by one of the pizza stores last week and asked after Dan. He had a goatee and he walked with a cane. That must be the same guy, Raphael, Dante put in. Do you know who he is and what he wanted with Dan? No, I had never seen him before, and as soon as I told him that Dan was working at home that day, he thanked me and walked out. Did you mention him to Dan before we went skiing? No, I skipped my mind to tell you the truth. Besides, I didn't think that he was anyone Dan wanted to know anyway. He paused. But how would this guy know about my brother's accident and where he's hospitalised? I haven't told anybody yet. The guys will be told tomorrow, unless you talk to Laylee or Ernesto. I sure didn't call anybody, Dante answered, and I don't think Keith did either. Okay then, but let me think a bit more about this, and if I hear something tomorrow from the guys, I'll tell you when you come in. Sounds like a plan, Dante agreed. But tell me, Lisa has been asking when we would go and see him. I don't think it's going to make any difference to his condition, Raphael. The doctor's not too keen on Dan having any visitor apart from Malou right now. They had to drain some blood from the lining of his skull early this morning, and the doctor wants complete quiet around him for a couple of days. Geez, that sounds worse than you first told us, Dante, but is the doctor confident he'll recover? Yes, absolutely. He just doesn't want too much excitement around him right now, that's all. Okay then. I'll tell everyone to stay away for now until Malou tells us otherwise. How's that? Yes, and I'll keep an eye on Malou in the meantime, if you think that's okay. She's just a ball of nerves right now. She even thinks someone is out to kill Dan. Because of this guy with the goatee? I guess so, and she's thinking that someone or something caught Dan going down the slope and made him trip on his skis. That's crazy. You guys were there and you saw it happen, didn't you? That's what I've been saying to Malou, but I think she's not going anywhere until she's sure Dan is safe. All right, tell you what, let me handle everything at this end, and if she needs you tomorrow, just stay with her for as long as it takes, okay? I think that's best, Raphael, and thank you. Don't even think twice about it, Dante. I'm really glad you and Heath are here to help.